The 1991 Halloween Gale storm is the stuff of movies and books. The storm itself was what they call a nor'easter, but it brought together a bunch of conditions that made it into one big killer storm, including the remnants of a hurricane. If you've seen the movie, if you've read the book, it's a storm that's been called the perfect storm because of the combination of cold air, warm air, and moisture from the hurricane at high tide. And the perfect storm of 1991 caught a fishing boat out at sea with no chance to get back, and all 6 crewmen were lost. And one boy that was out at sea taking instrument readings off the coast of Nova Scotia recorded one wave as high as 100 feet tall, which is about 9 stories. So Arctic air, Caribbean air, and a hurricane all coming together in one spot, in one moment, to create what's called a perfect storm, a storm in which there is no escape. And we don't need to be sailors to understand what a perfect storm means in our lives. All we need is a COVID-19 pandemic, sickness, death, economic hardship, quarantine, social distancing. Then throw in a winter storm, no electricity, no water, no milk, no gas. All that on top of broken relationships, children leaving home, divorce, disease, unfair job reviews, depression, and then politics that give everybody a headache. You name it, we can usually handle one of those things at a time, but you start adding those things up together, 2, 3, we all feel the perfect storm in our lives. This morning we're continuing our series, Places of the Passion. And we've been watching Jesus, and we've been witnessing the events of Jesus through the eyes of one of his best friends, Matthew, who wrote this down for a community much like ours. This morning we're walking with Jesus now into one of those places of the Passion, into the Garden of Gethsemane, where in the garden we find a perfect storm.
After Jesus ate his last supper with his disciples, the time for his personal freedom was quickly passing. The choice to flee Jerusalem or to stay and face suffering was upon him. Jesus went to a tranquil olive grove across the Kidron Valley and out of the city called Gethsemane to pray. There he fell before his Father, begging for the cup of suffering to pass if there was any other way. His anguish was so deep and severe that his sweat was as great drops of blood falling from his face. Jesus had to walk through this experience alone. Although his closest friends were nearby, they had fallen asleep, not fully grasping the hour at hand. It was here in Gethsemane that Jesus embraced the will of his Father. It was here that Jesus gave up his freedom to run, and from this garden Jesus was led in chains back across the Kidron Valley as a prisoner to face accusation and judgment. This ancient olive grove in Gethsemane stands as an eternal testament to the personal agony Jesus went through on his way toward the hours ahead that would lead to his death and our salvation. The trees have had carbon and DNA testing. Some of them have been here over 1,000 years and were planted by parent trees. Their pedigree seems to go back to the time of Jesus' lifetime and passion. The Church of All Nations now sits in the gardens where a 4th century Byzantine and a Crusader-era chapel once stood. It was built in the early 1900s by architect Antonio Barluzzi, who designed many of the beautiful churches in Israel, including the chapel at the Mount of Beatitudes. Its design is beautiful, and yet allows the visitor to contemplate the dark moment that transpired here, where Jesus willingly surrendered his freedom to the forces set against him. Pilgrims have come to this place for thousands of years to honor that choice and to reverently walk along some of the final footsteps of Jesus.
Gethsemane is known as the garden where Jesus prayed. And that's the garden where Jesus cries out to the Father, "Let this cup pass, if it be your will." There's this internal struggle. He's got a few of his disciples with him who fall asleep. And in that struggle, Jesus gives himself over to the Father's will, ready to do what he's come there to do. This is where Jesus, as we just heard, sweat great drops of blood, bearing the temptation to just leave and go someplace else that evening. But Gethsemane is more than this, so much more. Gethsemane isn't simply Jesus crying out to the Father. Gethsemane is a place where there's betrayal, a place where there is an arrest, a place where there is a power play or two. It's also a place where there's an assault. And ultimately, Gethsemane becomes a place for Jesus where it's a place of abandonment. Gethsemane is where the vortex of all of human history is landing. Jesus knows it. Hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years all landing on this moment. And all the power of that known world, all the power of the earth is now brought to bear on one Jewish rabbi. This Jewish rabbi has been talking about a kingdom of heaven, and the kingdoms of earth have had their fill. The kingdoms of earth have had their fill. They are no longer interested in listening about the kingdom of heaven. So Jesus is in the garden with his best friends. Pretty soon they are not alone. A crowd collects, and this is what Matthew tells us. While Jesus was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, suddenly arrived. A large mob with swords and clubs was with him from the chief priests and elders of the people. That's just a simple paragraph, but there is a lot loaded into this particular paragraph. I mean, the first thing we note is that there's a large mob. A large mob with swords and clubs. Now, this large mob was coming from the chief priests and elders of the people. It's interesting. They're not the ones actually in the garden there to confront Jesus. No, the chief priests and elders, the religious, the powerful religious of that day, the most powerful Jewish theologians, teachers, are sending a mob to confront Jesus. In the middle of the Jewish posse is one of Jesus' best friends. He has spent the last 3 years with Jesus. This is Judas. Judas, one of the 12, who hours earlier had had his feet washed by Jesus. Jesus washes Judas' feet, and Judas shows up with a mob to confront Jesus. Judas is not acting in good faith. He's made an arrangement with the religious leaders. You see, he is there with the mob, with swords and clubs. In Matthew, what's fascinating about Matthew is we don't have it up here, but the very next verse says, the betrayer. He only mentions Judas' name once. He can't say the name anymore. The betrayer. Betrayal is in the air. Judas is the one doing the betraying. Matthew himself had spent 3 years with Judas. So we find here in this garden that there is betrayal, there is power, there is plotting, there is hatred. It's all the perfect storm. And it's more than Jesus' friends can handle. The perfect storm shows up in a garden where you have this mix of religion and power and betrayal. And if power shows up, then we're going to meet power with power. We fight fire with fire. And here's what Matthew tells us. At that moment, one of those with Jesus reached out his hand, drew his sword. He struck the high priest's servant and cut off his ear. I mean, again, we would do this, right? One of the interesting thing is that somebody bothered to bring a sword with them into the garden. I'm not going to run down that road. But what Matthew wants us to see as he's telling us this story is that this mob shows up with swords and clubs, and the first thing that Jesus' friends want to do is whip out their own sword. They're going to meet force with force. They're going to meet fire with fire. You give us this, we're going to give it right back. That's their response for the perfect storm. They've been told this time is coming. Even up into the last few moments, they've spent some time with Jesus in the upper room. Jesus says, "This is my blood of the new covenant, poured out and shed for you for the forgiveness of sins. I am about to die." He's been saying this for the past few weeks. So the whole evening is strange. What's interesting about this particular thing is that we're told in another book that is written in the New Testament that Peter is the one who actually picked up the sword. Impetuous Peter. But think about what Matthew is telling us. That those who had spent 3 years with Jesus, those who were his best friends, still thought that the best way to fight earthly power is with more earthly power. That's their response in the middle of an earthly storm. So if those who are bent on confronting and arresting Jesus have swords, then so do we. So do we. And all this does, all Peter's sword does, all this sword that cuts off the servant's ear, all that does is add to the perfect storm. Nothing's fixed. And that's what this is about. You see, in that moment, the friends who are with Jesus, it's interesting, Jesus is not doing this. It's the friends around Jesus. The whole thing's about power and control. And they're playing along because they believe it to be true as well. The religious institutions of the day, the powerful Jewish religious leaders, they're all about earthly control. They're all about earthly power. They show up, and Jesus even talks about this a little bit with them, but they show up with swords and clubs against a Jewish rabbi, no less. It's all about power and control. And if somebody is coming to take power and control away from you, away from me, away from those who have been with Jesus all this time, what do you think we're going to do? Well, we're going to reach. We're going to reach for our sword. We're going to attempt to take our own power and control. Assert our own power and control. Because this is a power and control game. I have to be in control of my circumstances. And nobody is going to step into my space without me letting them know that I am in control. Are you tempted to try and control what will not be controlled? I mean, all of this is a perfect storm, which implies that we aren't in control. You know, when the perfect storm arrives in our life, what do? We throw the anchor over the side of the ship, right? We batten down the hatches. We begin pitching things overboard to lighten the load, to weather the storm. We consult the bank. We change the diet. We call a lawyer. We tighten the budget. We block whoever's on social media giving us fits. We get passive aggressive with those who are attempting to control us. We go to therapy. We do all sorts of things in which we are attempting to take back the control. Right now we like control of our audio. Even I don't have control of that right now. Apparently Joel does, though. Well, we forget, even in the midst of the perfect storm, that even that storm is not in control. Do we understand that? That when things happen to us and life seems to be spinning out of control and we have a perfect storm, that even that perfect storm is not in control. And that's what Matthew wants us to see. All this talk about swords and clubs, it's mentioned multiple times here in this passage. The most powerful man in the universe is the one being arrested. These ones showing up with swords and clubs, the most powerful religious people of that day, they're not in control. It only looks like they're in control. It only appears that they're in control. Listen to what Matthew says. Put your sword back in its place, because all who take up the sword will perish by the sword. Or do you think that I cannot call on my Father, and he will provide me here and now with more than 12 legions of angels? That's an absolutely amazing statement and question. I mean, it's taking what must be a very, very surreal moment, and now it's gone bizarre. I mean, Jesus is reminding everybody there, everybody present, from his own followers that are with him, to the crowd that he is confronting him, Judas himself, that nobody standing around him is in control, no matter how many clubs and swords that they have. He's in control. And it's comical. He reminds everybody, he has at his disposal, at least, it's interesting that he uses this, 12 legions of angels. That's about 72,000 angels. He has at his disposal if he says the first word. What makes it comical is, Jesus is over the top here. Because anybody in that garden right then, they all knew all it takes is one angel to take them all out. It's 72,000. He has at his disposal. All he has to do is say the word. They are attempting to arrest the Lord of hosts, Adonai, the Joint Chiefs Chairman of God's army, of God's military, the captain of the Lord's house. One word from Jesus, and this whole scene is over. One word and they're all dead. So put your sword away, Peter. Your sword is not helping here. Your sword can't help here. I don't need your sword. In fact, I do not need your attempt at salvation. I do not need your own self-preservation. I do not need your self-salvation. I'm in control here. And Jesus is saying he's been in control all along. Think about that. This whole evening started with him washing the disciples' feet. He has been in control every step of the way. And so when this whole crowd shows up, he reminds them, you guys aren't in control. That raises the question then, especially for very confused disciples, who would do that? If you had that kind of an army, if you had that kind of a force at your disposal, and you give the word, why wouldn't you use it? Why wouldn't you? The reality is he could have stopped the whole thing right then and there. He had the wherewithal to stop the perfect storm, and he doesn't. Nothing is out of control. Jesus is in control. The perfect storm is descending on them with all of its evil and all of its force, and he is not stopping it. Why doesn't Jesus summon the first angel? This is what he says. How then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen this way? All this has happened so that the writings of the prophets would be fulfilled. See, Jesus, his disciples, his followers are staying there and they're looking at this crowd. They're looking at this. All they can see is the swords. All they can see is the crowd. Of course they're going to grab their swords because, you fight earthly muscle with earthly muscle. Jesus sees a bigger picture here. And Jesus understands that all of history, all of human history has been waiting for this moment. He has faith in the scriptures. He has faith in the word. He understands what's going on. That all of redemptive history has been talking about this moment, seemingly forever talking about this moment, all the way back to the garden. When sin first showed up, and God says, at some point in time in the future, there is going to be a seed of the woman, and she is going to crush, and that seed is going to crush the serpent's head. That promise was thousands of years before this time. And Jesus sees the big picture. He is giving himself up to the will of the Father. He's giving himself up to redemptive history. He's giving himself up to the idea of his mission, the mission to save his people from their sins. Why does he do this? Why does he do that? Why does he bend down and wash the feet of those who are about to abandon him? Why does he wash the feet of one who is standing right there with one of the swords and clubs, with a kiss of betrayal? It's all about love. It's all about love. It's all about grace. Love is the answer for the perfect storm. It's not swords, it's not muscle, it's not clubs. It's not a better argument. It's not winning the day. It's not gaining the advantage over somebody else. It is love that is the answer for the perfect storm. In a Peanuts comic strip, Sally is talking to Charlie Brown here. She's struggling with her Sunday school memory verse. I memorized the verse we were supposed to memorize for Sunday. I don't know. Now you've made me forget. I mean, she just can't remember the Bible verse. And she finally says, maybe it was something Moses said or something from the book of reevaluation. Reevaluation, the book of reevaluations. The Bible's a book of reevaluations. It helps us reevaluate the perfect storm. Jesus is standing there in the garden helping everybody reevaluate who they are and what they're doing, even those who have come to arrest them. They don't stop. They continue what they're doing, but in this brief moment, in this little glimpse, I could call 10,000 or 12 legions of angels. He's giving them a glimpse of what reality is. He is helping them reevaluate. And I guarantee you, like I said last week, these little things that Jesus is doing in the midst of all of this, they're going to remember in just a few short hours in the pain and the humility and the humiliation of realizing that they've abandoned their best friend. The Bible's a book of reevaluation. It's giving us the big picture. It is always constantly calling us to reevaluate. What is it that you really think you see here? What's going on in your perfect storm? Who's really in control? The Bible, as a book of reevaluation, gives us a window into the fact that no matter what is happening in my life, no matter the perfect storm that I am going through right now, all those things that seemingly have decided that they are against me, that they're not in control. And it also shows us that the one who is in control loves us. Loves you, loves me. He's in control of our circumstances. He is in control of our heavy burdens. He is in control of the perfect storm, and He loves us. We come to Gethsemane here, and Jesus is reminding us that instead of calling those 72,000 angels, that He's not going to. He's reminding us that He goes to the cross, and He did go to the cross. He could have marshaled those forces, but He doesn't. And we follow the storyline. Jesus goes ahead and He goes to the cross. So that when the perfect storm for us arrives, He's already been there. He's already been through the perfect storm. And now He's with us. Jesus is with us. It is His job to see us through the perfect storm, whatever it is in our lives. Christ is the shepherd, we are the sheep. Christ is the bridegroom, we are the bride. Christ is the rabbi, we are the disciples. So there's one of three things happening in our lives right now with the perfect storm. One, we're either headed for a perfect storm. Two, we're in the midst of a perfect storm. Or three, we've been through one. Or we just went through one. All of us. Every single one of us right now in this room, all of us are in one of those categories. All of us have been through this. Perfect storms are the perfect opportunity to reevaluate and assess who we really are.
Life can bring us storms. Those moments where we wonder, doubt. The journey doesn't stop, but the progress does. It can be lonely, painful. Sometimes we try to stare it down, as if we can somehow will it to go away. Or we think we can go toe to toe and come out the other side, unscathed. We often forget just how small we are. The truth is, storms are inevitable. But when they appear, we have a protector, a savior who knows a thing or two about calming storms. A God who is a stronghold in times of trouble. In our weakness, He is strong. In our fear, He is courage. In our desperation, He is peace. Yes, storms are inevitable, but our God is invincible.
There isn't a lot of peace in our world right now. Maybe not a lot of peace right now in your own personal lives. And even the peace offered by the world isn't all that helpful. You know, the peace that we're offered by the world, a vacation here, some time off there, a movie here, some relaxation over there. The peace that the world is looking for involves an absence of chaos, pain, hurt, and suffering. Jesus doesn't promise to remove any of these things from us. What he does promise is that he will go through it with us. You know what makes Jesus invincible? You know what makes him the one to whom we go in the midst of a storm, regardless of what the storm is? It's the cross. It's the cross that makes Jesus invincible. What he does on the cross is exactly what we need in the midst of our storm. Because what we need to be reminded of anytime those storms come is that he loves us, he forgives us, he gives us grace, he still has us. All of that is in the cross. All of that is what makes Jesus invincible. If there's anything that we've learned over the past 12 months, it's that we're not in control. And it doesn't take a whole lot. Easily, we could have begun to think that we are invincible. Well, we've just been given a reminder that we're not. The peace in the midst of the storm is not found in swords or clubs. It's not found in anything, any piece of ingenuity that I can come up with. The peace is only found in the cross and the one who hangs on the cross for us. Anytime we have a storm, we don't have to be hopeless. We don't have to feel anxious. We don't have to be faithless. Because in a perfect storm, the one who hangs and hung on that cross loves us, gives us grace, gives us life, and gives us perfect peace. Let's pray.